We'll call the meeting back to order. We can resume our discussion on agenda item 2.32, Redland Water. And open the floor to any further questions or discussion. I know, so just to recap, we'd had the presentation from administration, good fulsome discussion. I believe I was hearing some consensus around following that strand. Sorry, I'm just finding the right paper. Basically, like Wheatland County ownership down through sort of individual, like recognizing potential challenges with supply chain with vaults and potentially increased costing. Look for the most cost-effective way was sort of what I was hearing, in alignment with procurement policy and legislation, to further explore that with Redland residents, perhaps with administration sort of coordinating with, for sure with the councillor of the area being involved. That could come back to council for consideration. That way we could get some input from the ratepayers on sort of what might be feasible in terms of structuring repayment. We had some discussion around cost recovery. I think those were sort of the principles that we were discussing around it. I did have basically a question. One question, one comment. Do we have certainty on, let's just say worst case scenario, at the end of the day, if there's core infrastructure for an essential service, would it ultimately, what I have been told and seen in other municipalities is that can fall on us, like the responsibility for like a significant repair or remediation of sort of issues or that type of thing. Is that true?
In terms of,
like, say it was done, there was some discussion, like the ratepayers had gathered information, like if they did something, well, and I guess it wasn't really feasible for them to do it completely independently, because it sounded like financing that would be challenging to do it totally independently. So maybe it's a moot point if that's not really being contemplated. Councillor Kester?
I think if there's a failure of any sort, say pipeline burst, water station, and the WRC can't fund it, they would probably come asking for money. They don't have the reserves built up now. Or if I release the signature on a loan, I don't know if they can borrow money. I think they can, but they would ask for municipal, because ultimately you're going to pay for it through the water rates. That's the only place they can derive money from. And ultimately, all the municipalities are partners in it. It's not like it's another, it is another entity, but it's completely owned by municipalities and municipalities. So I wouldn't anticipate any failures, not this young into the game, but yeah, they don't have for a catastrophic failure. Is that fair?
So I guess I support the idea of county-owned infrastructure, probably something like a local improvement tax, like we say, to keep things consistent no matter where in the county this kind of situation might arise. And I do think it's important to do our due diligence and get more than one quote to make sure that we've got the full understanding of the project and what's involved.
Any other questions or discussion?
I would support county-owned as long as it stays county-owned. Not going to be county-owned, built, and then turned over. It stays county-owned, county infrastructure, county water rates. And I don't have a problem with expenditures or anything like that. That's the same as everybody else in the county.
I have a question on, so when I look at the Redland plan with the different lots, would we include servicing to those lots? Because there seems to be a lot. Like, how many,
I think that was something through
there's a lot.
discussion that we thought could be clarified a bit more
Yeah.
through formal engagement with Councillor Kester and with administration, just to clarify how many lots are inhabited, like where there would be residents.
or could be bought? Like that's-
Yeah, and yes, there was reference as well to, within a policy or however we want to structure this, to have some sort of framework for future development.
Yep.
So that there's sort of equity and some buy-in to the system at that point, or
Yeah.
there's ways to structure that. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, there's other municipalities have done this, right? So,
I guess that's my point, just to make sure
Totally.
that lots that could be bought.
yeah, so if administration could just note that anything that would come back could address sort of new development, I guess. Councillor Kester?
Just roughly, now the way the line is, and if a middle lot did buy, here to that grader would be further than the line would be away. That makes sense. It's not that, looks like a long ways in the paper, but it's not that long. Like
Yeah, it's geographically, it's not a
the whole
huge
hamlet
community.
is less than from here to the highway.
Deputy Clausen?
So, here in the discussion here, I just want to make the council aware, so if what's on the screen in front of us, Range Road 222A, the properties to the left, those properties can be serviced right off the main line, like a rural customer, so there's no infrastructure needed, and to the right. So, it's kind of muddies the waters a little bit because they don't need any mains put in. They can be serviced right off the main if we allow them to be serviced as rural customers. Yeah, through WRC. So, and then if we build this and we want what Glenn's talking about and have them as county infrastructure, you have two different rates in a hamlet, then we're going to encounter that problem. I'm just looking at it, I'm going,
But you could put these on county rates too.
That might be, I mean, we can explore that during that engagement, and there might need to be some just exploration
It's
of
just-
where
there's
the hamlet
levels of
boundaries
this,
are.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think that for future considerations, the whole hamlet is
kind of hamlet boundaries.
right.
And that's
You'll
why I
run into
referenced,
trouble.
yeah, if we can explore boundaries. That's part of the consistency, right?
It's in the boundary.
Yeah.
It's county.
Exactly. Totally agree.
So
CEO
administration
Hutchinson.
does feel like we have clear direction on how to proceed with this. We will also be anxiously waiting the decision from the WRC board and see how that goes as well at their board meeting. But I do think administration has good information here to proceed with a little bit of engagement and bring something back to council for consideration. Thank you.
I think for the WRC meeting, the two representatives could convey to them. Because I believe they don't know which way to go, right? They're waiting for county.
Yeah, if as the area councillor, if the path we're on, if that's agreeable to you and to your ratepayers, I think you guys could convey that to WRC. Administration is working on this. I think we've conveyed to administration that we would like it prioritized because of the timing elements to it. So if we can expedite it, and I'm not saying WRC, I'm saying us as a municipality, and I know you guys have already put a substantial amount of work into this, so would you be looking for a motion to forward this, or I know we already have a motion.
So we have a motion to explore funding. So we feel like that may be complete at this point because we have presented options to council for consideration. So I probably would mark that complete on the resolution tracker if council were to adopt the motion that was provided.
Perhaps we should have a new motion, like
For
regarding engagement.
For potential water systems.
Okay. Engagement and like development of potential models.
To be
For servicing,
brought
is
back to
that-
council
I
for
think there was 3 motions prior.
Those were from 2020, I think.
Yeah, through the reeve, those are previous motions. The motion, or the resolution right now is just for this
For
report
2021.
accepted as information. Yeah, and I think that makes sense to have another motion to direct administration to reach out and with some community engagement and some information packages and collaboration with the community, and then report back to council with that information. The only other recommendation I might have, if council does know a particular pathway that they don't want administration to go, or a particular kind of general direction they'd want us to go, is maybe define that as well. It'll help us define the scope. Otherwise, we can leave it open to what we presented today and share all of those options and keep that discussion wide open. But if there is particular pathways that council would like to eliminate, that might be helpful in moving forward.
I think, like we discussed, county-owned, go down that pathway, don't mix it or go down any other pathways, because I'm afraid that's going to take all year to resolve. If we stick to that particular pathway, I'm thinking they can still get water this summer.
So if,
That's my hope. I think we can achieve it. I don't want to. It's going to carry on for 3 years, and that's just.
so if we were to direct administration to provide, and I'll look for help with wording around this, but to provide a model based on our discussion of having Wheatland County-owned infrastructure with the individual interior, so if you follow that route for design options, because I'm hearing that that's commonplace, cost-effective, and would mitigate the supply chain issues, and then explore potentially funding it through a local improvement tax, as General Manager Buteau outlined, but from the county-driven model versus a petition-driven model. So we could draft a model based on those, eliminate the other options, have that be included in the public engagement with the community, and then to bring back sort of how that resonates with the community to council for consideration. Is that the consensus that I'm hearing? Deputy Reeve Clausen?
So looking at this, then WRC would not be part of the hooking up the final mile, let's say, from the main end. So it would be a complete bill to the homeowner, meter, everything installed in their house. Basically, it'd be like a hamlet then, is what I'm thinking. I'm just going to a board meeting. I want to be clear. I can say like, no, we're not just putting the main in. We're going to do everything and debenture it, or however we recover it back to the homeowner. Is that what we're looking at?
I think every hookup is county-owned.
Yeah. So then.
It's like turning it over like it.
Yeah, and I do think that's still for debate.
Yeah.
We definitely need the WRC board approval as well. So yeah, I think there's a few things that once we get direction from the WRC board as well, it's definitely going to help our scope for that engagement process as well.
Well, county-owned would mean, to me, that we would probably have to have somebody do a weekly sample out there. It'd be our infrastructure, just like a hamlet would be, right? And the meter reads would be done by us, and the billing would be done by us. That's my interpretation. If anybody else,
Where would you sample though?
there'll be a
Do you-
hydrant at the end of one of these lines, or a
okay.
house. It's just,
Two hydrants.
yeah, or back to your side.
So through the reeve, one point of clarification there is under the local improvement tax, even within the MGA, if there was a shared cost of the shared infrastructure, that would be the main line. All of the individual hookups do, even per definitions in the MGA, do remain the responsibility of the individual landowners who are hooking into that main line. And so under that local improvement tax, any shared costs would be just the main line, and then the individual hookups are still the responsibility of the ratepayers within county standards and policies, of course.
When you're looking at, instead of a land-based thing, you could look at a water usage debenture. Then when a new customer comes on, it just pays the debenture off faster. That's what happens in the other hamlets. You're paying a debenture over 30 years. And then if somebody else comes on, they pay the debenture too, because they just hooked on then. But then maybe it gets paid off in 28 years.
Yeah, and that could be part of the proposal that's
Yeah.
drafted for the community consideration and then to be brought back for council for sure.
Yeah, we'll kind of go over those options and kind of refine the scope and kind of bring it back.
And then I guess if council were up for a second motion, just perhaps the drafting of some kind of policy to sort of put some parameters around this process so that if we are addressing this in the future, whether it's based on other infrastructure we've built or whatever, we would have a policy we could fall back on that's consistent and just sort of a framework to address these questions, just to simplify things going forward. So we could contemplate two motions, one directing administration to conduct the engagement within the community based on some draft modeling as we've discussed, and then a second to draft a policy for consideration to create a framework for utility servicing in hamlets or something like, or in maybe we want to say communities or nodes or something.
Through the read, I think we actually do have an outstanding resolution right now that that is similar enough to that I think we could use it for that as well. One other point, if I may, just for council's information that might be helpful in the discussion now or moving forward, just in our utility bylaw, in that bylaw, once there is a line that runs adjacent to a property, landowners are obligated to hook up to that line. If there's, say, a change in permitting, or they want to, they need to drill a new well or whatever, the bylaw basically states that if there is that type of change, the requirement is to hook into that line once it exists there. So just another point of pertinent information that council might be.
And that's typical, I think, in our development permits.
Yeah.
Like, we consistently do that. Perfect. Any other questions? Councillor Kester?
Shy away from a policy right now. If another situation comes up like this, you could use this as the model. I always shy away from policies unless you have a repeat a couple, 3 times, but just the one-off all the time. I always kind of cognizant of staff time. I would just say use this as a model if it ever happens again, which unless we start plowing lines in the ground, it's not going to happen again.
The reason I raise it is just because we are in the process of exploring the West Side servicing, and I think
Included in
there is a
the
likelihood.
servicing policy then.
Yeah, potentially we could do it there. Does administration have any advice on what might be the most, and it's a good point around time and capacity of our administrative team. We don't want to unnecessarily burden, but I also know it can be challenging to go back and you don't want to listen to a council meeting to figure out, how we directed, you know what I mean?
I think where it might be helpful, here we talked about the local improvement tax, which is in the MGA, so that does help cover a lot of this process. I think behind there philosophically becomes making decisions over and over again about shared costs. And I think that's the thing behind the scenes that might be helpful in a policy or sort of that philosophy of how that works. But really the process itself is outlined in the MGA with that local improvement tax. It's just if council is interested in setting some more general guidelines or bounds on that, that might be helpful for future decision making if council wanted to do something like that.
Well, if that's on the books anyways, you guys can address that based on the previous resolution, and council can consider that when it comes forward. Perhaps it's not necessary, and don't, if you deem it a waste of time or whatever, please don't, never waste time, do things the most effectively. Are we ready for, Councillor Kester, would you like to put a motion on the floor? I can paraphrase what we discussed.
With council's deliberations on county-owned infrastructure at Redland and a debenture of some sort to pay for our share of it. Consistency like we've done with other hamlets. Is that close enough?
I think just direction to facilitate the engagement with the community as well. I think that's key.
Yes, that's a key part of the resolution, that because it's part of the communication policy that administration must advise council of any engagement.
And when
prior
you
to
do
meeting.
a debenture, you have to have a public engagement.
Perfect.
Include that.
I'm confident Shanna will magically turn that into
Resolutions.
Not a good drafter.
No, it's good. I think it's perfect. Is all of council clear on what we're deciding on? Okay. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Excellent. Motion is carried. Thank you to administration for your patience with our disjointed deliberations around that. Deputy Reeve Lawson?
Sorry, I just want to, so if I get asked at WRC board meeting if they're going to be responsible to hook up to the main line,
Oh, right.
I just want to make sure.
The WRC role, so when
Where's
you're
the
saying it would
WRC
be an
role going?
individual ratepayer, will the county be overseeing or facilitating that process? How does that work? That was a question I had as well. And is there a WRC role in that
Yep.
process?
For a county-owned system, is that? Yeah, so there would be through the REIT, there would be a single hookup to the WRC main line, or multiple hookups if others wanted to hook up on that line. And what you would have is you'd have to tee into that, and then create a point of transition with a meter. And so it would fall under our current WRC agreement, but we would have to work with them in connecting into that line and figuring out what that looked like.
Anything after the point of connection and the valve would be ours.
That's right.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you.
Anything else outstanding for the WRC? It is important that we have clarity for you guys for taking it forward. Okay, perfect. And then in terms of from administration, is there anything concrete that the WRC board needs to bring forward to the county to help move this forward? Like a specific motion, or I'm just trying to help these guys because I know they're going to be going to a meeting and we don't want to slow this down unnecessarily for the community.
Through the REIT, I don't think there's a specific motion necessarily. I know because we have council did direct us last time to work with the WRC, so we have shared with them and this information that we were presenting to council today. They were going to share similar information with the WRC board tomorrow, just on the WRC stream.
Okay.
I think the decisions made by council today basically defines that stream for them, whereas that presentation might actually be not needed anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, but maybe some discussion about what council decided today, and then probably administration would approach WRC in the future if the project ended up going ahead and approved by council to just work with the WRC about a hookup to that line. And so, if anything, maybe some discussion with the WRC about, hey, there's a potential hookup, and if they would be amenable to that in the future.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, we will move to 2.33. Councillor Laverson. Sorry? I think I did call a question and then we had one more question after. Yeah, it was unanimous support.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's okay. There was just a bit of discussion after the vote, which was important, just to clarify for WRC. Councillor Larson, I believe you circulated message on behalf of ASB.
Yep. Has everybody read it, or do you want me to read it to you?
I did read it.
Okay. So, this is an enigma to me why, when all of council sits in the ASB, that we have to bring all these decisions to the council to get ratified, but nonetheless, that's the way the process is currently set up. So, in our meeting with CAP and EPAC, CAP had suggested that we have a meeting with the area operators as a first step before going directly to lobby the government. We thought that was a good idea, so we're just looking for council to ratify what I basically said here, that we'd like council's ratification to go ahead and set up the necessary meetings to accomplish this. The county, particularly the Ag Service Board, would act as the role of facilitator rather than a participant, with the understanding that the county supports WARS, which we've already done in a letter. But we think it's important that because we're not a party to the negotiation, we have to kind of stay back a little bit.
Any questions or discussion on the motion?
We talk, sorry.
Councillor Laprise and then Deputy Ruth Klassen.
So we talked about it when we met with CAP and, sorry, I don't see their, EPAC, yeah. With a little concern about what Wheatland's role should be, or ASB's role should be, and how it comes across to the industry, I guess. So I assume there's been a conversation about that this is our lane, I guess, that with our administration.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I just don't want to come across as being taking on a role that's not ours to have, I guess.
That's why we're going to be the facilitator. So that means we don't have a position necessarily on this particular issue because it's between the ratepayers and the oil companies. If it was taxes that wasn't being paid to the county, that would be a different issue, right? But because this is between ratepayers and the oil companies, we're just acting as a facilitator.
So should we though? Are we facilitators? I guess that's I just don't know.
Maybe just a point for clarification for council. So, as for facilitating, I think it is important that council is supporting and ASB is supporting agricultural activities in the county by farm producers. However, if there is a future role for the county or the ASB in this, it most likely would fall within legislation that would need change and would need advocacy through RMA or provincial things. As for, providing a facility for someone to meet, we do that on a regular basis. There's community groups that come in and use our facilities either here. We're hoping to get some actually down in Carsland in the new fire hall. But outside of that, I think the ASB's role could most likely be deemed as complete at this point with the letters of support to the Wheatland and Area Surface Rights Society. But then besides that, I think meeting space is a good one. But besides that, I struggle to kind of see the role unless there is going to be any policy changes from a provincial standpoint in any existing legislation or potentially new legislation that should be passed. I think it would be wise for the ASB to consider that when kind of facilitating things and, definitely arranging meetings for people is good. But, we think that people can probably do that as well on their own behalf.
They do have a strong board for sure. I think they've had better success than some other people I know in meeting with some pretty powerful ministers.
Yes.
They do have a very strong board. I do have mixed feelings as well, just in clarity around role, for sure.
Well, and I just think, you would hire a professional facilitator if you wanted to. So that's not what our job is, facilitators. We could facilitate the meeting, but not actually facilitate the discussion. I don't know.
Like provide meeting space like CEO Henderson said, or contact information or things like that. If I would look to administration or to Councillor Lowerson.
Provide meeting space might be a good potential revision for consideration. I think that the ASB and council can definitely work together on any potential policy or legislative changes, new or existing.
And there's definitely support from other municipalities for that as well. I have had a couple of reeves just asking, like, are you guys bringing something? And I'm like, our ASB's working on it. They've got it. Councillor Larson.
And just one further point to Brian's comment, that there is still one outstanding item that council has directed the ASB to do, and that's to revise the resolution that potentially could come through here and then go to the RMA. So the ASB's role is not complete per se, but I think we have, if we do this meeting, and also I forgot to mention that ORS would like to invite Minister Savage, which I don't see a downside to that because they're probably in session and she can't come, but an invitation certainly isn't out of line. And at least when she says no, we can say, well, we sent the invitation. But I mean, if we're all hung up about facilitate, I don't care. We can change it to something else.
If I may, as well, through the Reeve, one thing, and I'm glad you brought up that outstanding resolution. So part of that resolution was to get legal review as well and potentially update for a revised resolution to the RMA that was consistent with legal advice of where the council should be acting within this. So we haven't gone out for additional legal advice yet because we haven't updated that resolution or started to do that. But one of the points in the original legal advice that we got was exactly what CEO Henderson mentioned, is the advice to stay within the realm of potential public policy revisions or updates are within there. I know right now as administration reviewing this, currently we're having a difficult time seeing within the original resolution that was proposed where those policy updates or recommendations through the RMA or potentially to the province would exist. And so just interested to see kind of where this goes and if something like that does emerge, that we can actually use as a resolution to the RMA. So.
Deputy Rick Clausen and then Councillor Kester.
Looking at this, so originally we wanted to talk to CAP and EPAC to see if they could help, correct? So now they're coming back and saying, talk to the producers, but there was already a process for the producers and the people in wars to go through for disputes, correct? Like they have they may not agree that they may not like the process, but there's a process. So now they want us to meet with the producers, and that's the problem. Is I have no problem with CAP and EPAC, but when you get into we're stepping on the toes of the process that they may have to deal with their own individual agreements, kind of, are we going to hurt matters by doing that and muddy the waters? That's all I'm worried about.
Well, this was suggested by CAP, and in part that's because CAP doesn't get into what they call regional issues at a county level. If there was something that was affecting the entire purview of CAP's, CAP actually has no authority, but they have influence. But if it was something that affected the entire province, for example, which we might be able to make the argument that it does, but they thought this would be oftentimes, and so, well, I don't want to say too much. Let's just say we'll probably have had a little help from them before the meeting happens, and it's just a matter of meeting with the right people. It might be an easy way, and it might not be. It's hard to say. I mean, the bad actors might just refuse to meet. But this is what they had suggested. If you guys don't want us to do it, we won't do it.
No, it's not. I just want to make sure that we're not going to hurt their individual negotiations, because there's a process that they have in place, and if they can get everybody into one room, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't want to wreck their process. That's all. And if it doesn't,
I think that process is there regardless of what happens at the meeting. But this is a regional thing and it's voluntary. And if they can voluntarily meet and we're just facilitating, especially for the first meeting, see how it goes, maybe they want to make changes, I'm fine with that. But if this gets them all together in the same room, I see it as a good thing. And what comes out of that meeting comes out of it, whatever it is, and go with it. But just to get together and meet as a group, I think is a good thing, and I could support that. What happens, they all got to get in the room.
Councillor Priest and
But
then
it
Deputy
comes,
Rick Clausen.
for me, it comes down to this facilitator, like you yourself, Rick, say that you need to be qualified to do certain jobs. And so I don't know if that's the ASB's job. Like if I were at WARS, I'd want to hire a professional facilitator so that how do we control a dialogue that I just don't feel qualified, I guess.
Yeah, Councillor Larson.
I will
and then
change this
Deputy Rick
then,
Clausen.
if this is such a sticking point. I will go, the county would host a meeting for WARS and the producers to meet.
And would you be open just to, like saying, provide meeting space like CAO Henderson? Okay, perfect. Okay. So then the motion would be, council would provide meeting space. Even a question to CAO Henderson, do we need I know you've allowed other boards that I've sat on, like to utilize meeting space in community groups. Would you prefer a motion?
It's at the discretion of council.
It might be a good
Clearly
show of
it's been a
support to have a motion.
It's been a discussion point today, so it might just be wise just to pass a resolution while you're on the topic.
Okay. So that Wheatland County Council would extend an offer to provide meeting space for Wheatland. I'm going to butcher the acronym. Wheatland and Area Surface Rights Group. Is that right? Okay. Society. Yes, I always am missing the S. Thank you. We could actually even just say for any meetings they want, like for meetings that they want to hold, and then that could open up, because there may be ratepayer meetings that I know they've used different community centers and things like that, but I'm happy to support their work. As CAO Henderson said, this is critical to our agriculture industry. These payments are obviously for lost use of ag land, which significantly impacts our ag sector, so definitely want to support that. Are we clear on that motion? Shanna, you're okay? Okay. Is everybody clear on the motion? Okay, any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We will move to 2.41, Council Resolution Tracker.
Yes, good afternoon, Council. Brian from Administration. So on page 52 of your agenda package is the Council Resolution Tracker. The Resolution Tracker starts on page 55. Anything in yellow is still ongoing. Anything in green has been deemed complete. If there are any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Any questions regarding the Council Resolution Tracker?
I'll move the council accept the council resolution tracker dated May 17th as information.
Councillor Eichert has moved. Any questions or discussion?
I guess I just wanted to ask about, so I see there's 7 resolutions with WRCC. Are we hopeful that we can move some of these forward?
Yes, we are actually. So there actually should be some of them going to the board meeting actually tomorrow. And it has been kind of just a process that has just been, ongoing. And we are hoping that some of these do get updated. We did provide more detail in the update column, which is the one in the middle. So we are hoping that we can kind of bring something back for council consideration to kind of tie off these resolutions.
I had one other question or comment, and that's about our hydrogen industry RFP. It had to be reissued. Do you know what the...
I'm not quite sure, Matt. Do you why did the hydrogen RFP have to get reissued?
Through the REIV, some of the submissions, we review them in confidence, so we just had to reissue the RFP in order to provide clarity to the submissions, as there were a few oversights that we were required to hit just with our due diligence as the county. So without saying too much, because it is a process that we have to really delicately balance,
Yeah.
but yes.
So
we feel confident that
It's
we're
about
going to-
clarity. It's
Yes.
not about, none of these are good,
Correct.
starting over?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha, thank you.
And that can happen from time to time. There's been, maybe one a year that needs to get reissued. I can think of another one off the top of my head, but it can happen from time to time. And
Yeah, I'm sure we don't realize something until you see it come back, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not what we meant, or whatever. Yeah, okay, that's good, thank you.
So just in terms of an updated timeline for that, just seeing some of the hydrogen announcements happening across the province and that type of thing, do we have an update on the new RFP and a timeline for that coming back to council?
So to council, I do believe, without saying a specific date, it was reissued early last week. And then with that being said, I'm going to say, where are we at here? June. probably mid-June if we're successful in terms of getting that out. Now, I will add, though, that we have been engaging and our social media has been very active with respect to hydrogen and that kind of investment attraction. So we are doing a little bit of work behind the scenes while still anticipating a hydrogen specialist to come on board should the proposals be sufficient and meet all the qualifiers. So we're looking forward to that.
Any other questions regarding the tracker? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.42.
Yes, good afternoon, Council. Brian again from administration. So one outstanding resolution that we had on the resolution tracker is just scheduling of the AGM. So the AGM hasn't been held since 2019. The reason why was just because of COVID. I think the 2020 AGM was scheduled for March, mid-March, and that's kind of just when everything kind of just stopped and got canceled just with COVID. So we are hoping to reschedule this. After reviewing and kind of having a second set of eyes on this, probably a second look at this RFD. One thing that council should consider is that we probably should host the AGM in the county, not in Rockyford. I think when I initially submitted it, I just looked at the polling stations in Division 6. And just for the two new councillors, the AGM is kind of rotated through a cycle of divisions. So I had the last one hosted was in Division 5, and that was in Lyalta. However, it does follow the schedule, so we do go to every division each year when it is held. So that's the reasoning why for Division 6. Or the recommendation of the Division 6. Typically, it is held in the spring, and we want to be cognizant of harvest time as well in the fall. If council chooses to host it in the fall, and it may be in the spring next year, just up to council discretion. That's all I have. Thank you.
Council's wishes. Councillor Kester?
Instead of holding it in the fall, harvest, we don't know. But usually after seeding and spraying, end of June's kind of a lot easier time for the farmers. I would propose 28th or 27th that week. Anytime that last week, I don't see nothing wrong. That's an easy time for farmers. It's not perfect time, but it's easier than harvest.
I was going to recommend something like November. I don't know if it matters if it's fall or spring.
Depending on the year, November can still be harvest time. It certainly wasn't last year, and it doesn't look like it's going to be this year, but you just never know. I think June is for farmers, June's the safest month, like towards the end of June,
Some
because it's kind of
farmers
between
like
spraying
Christmas.
and dryland haying, and it's probably after the first cut for irrigated, I would think.
Depends on the year.
Depends again on the year, yeah.
Some farmers like to get away once they're done spraying and speeding.
It's true.
I don't know. Yeah, just set the date.
Then you know if kids are still in school that week.
The last week of June?
Yeah.
Are they?
Only elementary. My kids would be done, but it doesn't matter.
I'm just thinking along the vein of getting away.
Yeah.
Like if people are
Yeah.
gone.
Oh, I think our last day would be June 29th. But, because older kids write exams, they don't have to go to the very end. So, yeah. Anyways. doesn't matter.
As long as summer holidays haven't started.
Yeah, exactly.
So are we
Officially.
looking for Rosebud then, for the facility? That'd be,
Rockford. It says right on the...
no, because
he's
it's not our
just said he-
municipality.
Yeah.
Dale Henderson was recommending a change.
I would suggest holding it in Wheatland, in a facility in Wheatland County. Yes, in my apologies.
When it's your turn, we will.
It could
Next year.
It could be next year, it could be next year.
Because I think the second last one was in Hazar, then it was in.
That's a village.
My division. Actually was. We shouldn't do that, really.
I think it's a good
Utilize the community
recommendation
halls in our
to,
area.
utilize Wheatland County where
Especially
we
now,
can.
because we can provide rent back to them to utilize it.
Yeah.
It's good. But as far as attendance goes, I think Hazar had, maybe 30? Lyalta had less than 10. So there isn't, you never know, right?
We've had them with only one.
Yeah.
I was imagining
I'm going to challenge you to have more ratepayers than staff there. That's my challenge. I know you don't control that, but
I'll make a motion that I think the 27th of June in Rosebud. I don't think there's plays on Mondays, is there?
I don't think so. No, should be good.
I don't want to conflict with a play at the community hall. I guess check, see if it is a conflict, if it is just,
We could say the week of, and then
week
depending
of.
on facilities,
With the start
earlier
time.
in the week would be better, I think, just based on what Councillor LaPriest was saying around school schedules. Councillor Bigger.
I'm okay with the date, but can we look maybe at changing the structure of the AGM a little bit?
We'll open to anything.
Make it more, instead of us all sitting up at the front line and introducing ourselves and saying our background, it's just so old fashioned. I think if you had centers, go like Public Works and have like a couple counselors with staff at every center and have it more interactive rather than just sitting there listening.
More of a trade show / conference setup.
Yeah.
Nihil County has a neat model like that. I don't know if it's their AGM, but they do like almost like I think it might be more daytime, but they do centers like that. And they even had activities for kids where there was like pie, like paper pies, and the kids could they were teaching them about operations of the county and the costs and things they had some interactive things like that.
Just an idea.
I have a question about the time. Does staff have enough time to prepare for this in that time period? And would we be able to do this late afternoon or something? Like if we're gearing towards the farming community, will after supper make a difference, or is it better to do it in the afternoon and we can save some overtime maybe on staff too? Because there's quite a few staff hours involved in this.
One thing to consider as well, just for council before council votes on that resolution, is we could also wait until the community engagement results are in. Just another consideration. As for time for staff, the salaried staff don't get paid overtime. They're on a time off in lieu program. So any resources that are going into this, council approves, and they'll just take off time later to kind of balance that out.
I don't mind the idea of afternoon, like late afternoon. You could almost do open house style though if you were doing something more like what Councillor Bigger said, and you could start at 4 or 5 or something, and then but maybe go till 7:30 or 8 or something.
I defer to the councillor of the area. He knows his people. So
Yeah, although you have to keep in mind you could have ratepayers traveling
that's right.
across the county to come. Hypothetically, this could happen. Councillor Kester.
have to remember that's pretty close to the longest day of the year. So after supper is just as bright as
Yep.
before supper. I think after supper is probably easier for people to travel to. I would still do the panel thing, everybody sit in front, but it doesn't have to be so long. We can just, I think they appreciate knowing who everybody is, where you're from, because a lot of people don't know. But we don't have to do it for so long, and then we can break up into public works and development.
Council could put their heads together, or administration could put their heads together too, and if we give direction on the date and the place, you guys could draft a potential kind of format and float it to us.
I just think we need to change the format a little bit, maybe a little bit at a time, but make it a little bit more hands-on. And ASB should be there.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So we can try for that week in June if it works out.
Okay,
I don't
so
want to double up on a show.
Councillor Kester has a motion for the last week in June in Rosebud for administration to facilitate the AGM. Does anybody have any questions or discussion?
I think
Did I miss
earlier in
something?
the week is the best because there are rodeos
Yeah.
on the 30th around that.
Yeah, and you get into the holiday. Yeah,
Tuesday is with IMSA meeting,
okay.
just soon.
So maybe preferably the Monday if possible, prioritize, and then maybe the Wednesday if not. I don't know what day the Wednesday is. try for the Monday, and if that doesn't work, we can go from there. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.43.
Yes, Council. So Brian again from administration on page 66 is just an RFD about the RMA slideshow. So it was identified at the fall RMA that there was a fact that was incorrect on the slideshow. So we're kind of just looking for council direction on a fact that we can put back onto that slideshow. So the incorrect slide, I believe, is in here as well, just for council.
Top of page 67.
Yeah, top of page 67. So we're just looking to correct that fact, and it's just on the screens as well. So, and this isn't something that needs to be decided on today. Administration did put some options forward for council to consider, and they're kind of within options 1 through 5. And I think that's about it. It can be a discussion at the committee of the whole. It just needs to be something that needs to get addressed. And we're again not looking for an answer today, but if council does have an answer today, that's great. We can update that RMA slide. If not, we can add it to the committee of the whole for discussion. Thanks.
Personally, I like option 1. It's unique, and it's one of the items that, like tourism, that we like to promote in the area.
I would support that. I know from, if I put my RMA hat on, we are asking municipalities to highlight either, like you said, something that's unique, or if there's innovation that's been happening in the county. I know our MRO program always raises people's interest, but I would fully support option 1 as well. So some municipalities are opting to move to highlighting like an innovative process or something like that, just to, because it's also a way to share with our colleagues on councils across Alberta. So, but I also like 1. I think 1 is to highlight the Rosebud School of the Arts and the theatre would be fantastic as well. Councillor Kester.
If we're going to mention anything about how many oil and gas wells we have, I think it hits harder if you say we have more oil and gas wells than we have quarter sections. And people can get an idea of how dense it is. One time we had almost twice as many oil and gas as quarter sections.
Any other thoughts? Do we want to just decide today? Do we want to bring it to committee of the whole? What are people's thoughts? Who wants to decide today? Raise your hand. Tom really wants to think about this. Would you be comfortable deciding today, Tom?
I'd be comfortable with deciding
Is it only one slide you can do? Or
Yeah, we can only do one.
It's just one slide and it's up very briefly. They cycle through very quickly.
Well, then we go with option 1.
Yeah, I don't understand where this is coming from, but this was at our.
So they play, you'll have seen them up on the screens. They play in the background like during breaks or prior to the convention starting or things. Sorry?
Like a little advertising.
And I pointed this out to Brian because I was watching the slideshow, and of course that was my first RMA convention. I went, wait a minute, Siksika Nation's not in the county, they're their own nation.
And we actually have discussed this before, we just haven't changed it. So, yes.
Okay, now I understand what we're doing. Okay.
I'm hearing consensus around option 1. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Councillor Kester has moved. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Awesome. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Councillor Larson, for bringing that forward. 2.44, unaudited financial statements.
Microphone.
Good afternoon, Council.
Good afternoon.
Joel from Corporate Services, here to present the Q1 financial results. We'll do a quick summary of the statement of financial position and the statement of operations for you. Let me just get on the right schedule here. So this statement of financial position for Q1 of 2022, we provided for your reference as well, the equivalent date of the prior year, so you can refer to the changes, and it gives you some context of what's going on there. So just kind of summarizing from the financial assets part of the report, you'll notice a couple things on there. One would be the short-term investments and the cash item, which is the first line item, going from the $55.3 million to the $2.6 million. And really what that is just mid-2021, we changed the way that we approach our portfolio, and the accounting standards just require us to report that as a separate line item. And that's why you see the portfolio investments show up, that $55.7 million, and the line item underneath it. So overall, the other significant item, which to provide you some more clarity on that, would be the inventory held for resale. That's simply the Muirfield lot inventory that we're currently having on the market to sell. So the total financial assets for the quarter comes to the $72.6 million. Then we can just review the liability section. There's nothing really out of the ordinary there. Accounts payable, which would be for operating items and things that we've incurred but haven't paid yet and still have to pay, long-term debt as a liability, employee benefit obligations, things such as that. So those come to the $13.8 million. Pardon me. And so the net result of the financial assets less the liabilities is the net financial assets, which effectively is, as of the end of quarter one, if we had decided to extinguish all of our obligations and liabilities, the $58.7 million is what we would have remaining in assets. And then if we just go to the bottom of the schedule, the accumulated surplus is effectively the equity or the total value of the organization, the $299 million. Which it sounds like a lot of money, but you'll also note that the tangible capital assets section of that is the $226 million right here. And so that represents all of our infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, machines, all that infrastructure. So that's a substantial part of our total value within the organization. And then the remaining $73 million, that would be the net financial assets, as well as that $13 million or $14 million inventory for consumption and a marginal amount for prepaid expenses. That kind of is a summary of the statement of financial position. I'll ask if is there any questions before I go to the next. No. So you'll find this, I believe it's on page 73 of your package, yes. The unaudited consolidated statement of operations. So what this is it's the operational revenue and expenses for the 3-month period, for the first 3 months of this year. And what we've done here is we've provided you 2 budget columns for reference. One would be the full year budget, which was approved back, I think, April 5th. And the other would be the quarterly budget, which is for the first 3 months. So something to keep in mind with the quarterly budget is most budget lines that we look at, we distribute it evenly throughout the year. So for example, if an area wanted $1,200 of fuel costs, we would put $100 every month in their division for that expenditure. Unless in certain cases where we are aware that there's revenue or expenses that are significant that we know they will happen in a certain month or time frame, then we'll put the budget where it belongs or where it makes most sense. And that's what you're seeing here with the net property tax line. If you look at the quarterly budget, you'll notice that it's in a deficit value. And the reason for that is because we don't bill or levy our tax revenue until the second quarter. So you would not see the budget here and you wouldn't see the actuals. And so the reason why it's in a deficit as well is that our largest requisition that we collect for the taxes is for the school district. And they require us to make quarterly payments of what the tax value that we're collecting for them. And so the deficit just simply represents that payment that we've made for the first quarter to the school district. And as we go into the second quarter, you'll see the budget and the actuals will come more in line with what we're seeing with the annual budget as we realize that property tax revenue. And to clarify as well, in terms of those requisitions, the reason why we don't put them in the expense section is because they're not really effectively a county expense, so we kind of be overstating them in that way, right? So they fall into the net property tax section. As for the expenses, you'll note that the quarterly value of $12 million is approximately, we're about $2.3 million under what the quarterly budget would be. And again, that's just what I was mentioning earlier. the main driver for that is because we distribute most of the budgets evenly across the year. But a lot of our seasonal staff and operations, we actually see Q2 and onward into the summer, and the activity that they incur would be driving fuel and use of inventory and all these other things that we see proportionally costed more in the latter part of the year as opposed to the earlier part. That concludes my summary of the financial statements. I'm available for any questions if you have them.
Any questions?
Well done. I might look bored. I understand that, I just don't like it.
Any other questions or discussion?
I'll move presentations information.
Councillor Kester has moved. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We'll move to 2.45. Good afternoon.
So I'm not quite sure how you'd like me to present this. This is just for the library funding. We do this annually every year. And so it's just, I don't know how to go ahead about it. It was started in 2013, where the council decided that they needed to help contribute to fund some of the libraries throughout all the libraries who are active libraries in Wheatland County. And so they came up with this this formula. And so this year I spoke with Marigold Library, and they gave me our card holders who in all the various libraries are Wheatland County residents. And that's how I came up with the total amount payable for helping our libraries out with their operating funding is $46,050. And so I just like you folks to take a look at that.
That's perfect, Jessica. We've all had the information and reviewed it. Does anybody have any questions or discussion? If not, council's wishes.
I'll move that council direct staff to forward contributions totaling $46,050 to the libraries located within Wheatland County as indicated in this request for decision, subject to continual operation as a library in 2022. Further, that the contributions be funded from the library reserve.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Glenn's got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, since we've been doing this since 2013, it's off of a motion. Maybe it's a time we make it into a policy? Or is there a problem with that?
We can. The resolution's outstanding, so we do follow it. We can certainly make it into a policy. Technically, that resolution stands, so we always bring it forward. Yeah. Discretion of council, whatever you guys would like to do.
Councillor Kester, you're suggesting like a policy that would override the request for a resolution?
The motion. That way, policies are continual. Motions are.
I'd probably say the benefit of a policy would be that the policy would be published on our website and easily available, where the 2013 resolution probably isn't easily accessible and not as prevalent as a policy would be. That would be the only difference. The policy would not take very long to draft. You guys could pass a motion, we could do it and bring it back at some point before we have to do it again. So,
well, I'll make a motion that we get staff to develop a policy. And if we don't like it, we can.
Sounds good. Any questions or discussion? So just for clarity, Councillor Kester, would that be like to eliminate the need for a resolution every year?
Yeah.
So then I think we would also need to look at that library reserve policy concurrently.
Yeah, it's more transparent to the public. It's in our.
Yeah. Would you consider a friendly amendment to concurrently amend the corporate and financial services policy section 2.917, the library reserve one, just where it says we need a resolution? Because then that could just reference the policy. Does that work? Or is that not acceptable under reserves?
We do intend to actually amend all of the reserve policies this summer, and bring them back for council just to kind of consolidate them. I think a policy with the library funding would be adequate, and then it's a project actually for corporate services this summer, and
So you could align the reserve policy to the library policy.
yeah. So I think Councillor Kester's motion would be good, and we can
Okay.
proceed that way.
Perfect. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. 2.46.
Good afternoon, Council. Matt from Administration. On page 77 of your agenda package is a recommendation from Administration to send a letter of support to a local Wheatland County business located at the legal lot description. Just by way of background, we received an email requesting a letter of support from the local business, and the draft is in the agenda package for your consideration. Thank you.
Council's wishes.
I'll move the council authorize Reeve to sign a letter of support to be sent to Poplar Bluff Organics, included in its application to access additional funding through the Alberta Tourism Growth Innovation Fund.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
The horseshoe pitch thing, are we going to revisit that, or? That was
I believe we passed a
2.31.
motion.
Yes, the motion is completed, and I believe we sent the letter for signature, and we can circulate that to all of them.
Okay, that's all we need to do with that.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yep, you should get the copy by the end of the day today.
Thank you.
We'll move to 2.47. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council. Dave from Administration. We had a request to waive municipal taxes on roll 3598100, which is a High Eagle Campground. The request from the operators to waive taxes for tree removals, replacements, and pruning. Administrations have reviewed this, and memorandum of agreement does provide an agreement for waiving for capital expenditures, and administration suggesting that the pruning is a maintenance item covered under section 7 of the lease, and not recommending that portion of that work be covered under the capital improvements. That basically concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions.
Council's wishes.
So is there precedent for doing, like, have we done this for other organizations?
We've done it for the two campgrounds. As part of the agreement, that we've done it in previous years.
Sort of the premise of it is because we own the property and they're making improvements to it, that they're basically raising the value in lieu of paying the taxes, provided it's all done within the kind of parameters.
I get what's going on. I just wanted to make sure this wasn't the only one we were doing it.
Councillor Kester, then Councillor Bigger.
I was going to move the motion.
You can, and we can continue discussion.
The council waive a portion of the 2022 municipal tax roll up to 3669.55, subject to the sublease, providing acceptable and detailed documentation of capital expenditures for improvements to the lands of tree removals and tree planting services.
Councillor Bigger?
I'm just curious, maybe not related to this as much, but do the RV lots pay taxes?
No, the lots don't.
There's nothing there. There's no improvement, so they don't pay.
They're not permanent structures.
Yeah, they're not permanent. It's just
RV storage does.
RV storage lots.
RV storage lots.
Yes.
RV storage lots.
Yes, the one that's in Muirfield and the one that's, well, the proposed one in Muirfield and the one that's coming up in Speargrass
I
as
see what
well.
you're saying.
They pay taxes.
That might be a
Taxes?
question.
So the request today is to waive the taxes on the municipal taxes on this I guess land. Anyone camping on this land, they wouldn't have a separate tax bill. This is all titled to that specific role, if that makes sense.
I think this is related to RV storage lots.
So they would also have, if it's county-owned site, they would be exempt from taxation. And even if, say someone leased county land like the RV storage lots, sorry, I'm kind of getting to it roundabout way, but then that responsibility for us as a landowner, we would have that taxation burden, but it would just be exempt from taxation. Just because
Makes no sense for us to pay ourselves.
Yeah, it's assessed, but it's not taxed. It's exempt under, there's a code in assessment that.
Does the community association pay tax on that RV lot?
No, because it would be our property. Yeah, and it's kind of the same premise of this almost, but it's our land. We rent to them for $1 for the benefit of the community itself. So
They don't pay tax?
No, they would not. They would pay the lease of $1.
Okay.
We have a motion on the floor. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move to 2.48, Proposed Rosebud Community Tree Planting Concept Plan.
Good afternoon, Council. Again, Dave from Administration. The RFD kind of outlines, we've been working with the Rosebud Community Association on a tree planting project. So there's details in the agenda package about the tree planting project and what the plans are. Basically, it's planting along Highway 840 along the road right away, going into the community of Rosebud and kind of exiting on the north and kind of through the community. So there's a concept plan of kind of the tree planting plan in the package as well. It's roughly 65 trees they're looking at planting. They're going to raise the funds for the tree planting end of things, and just to allow an application to Alberta Transportation. They will only consider it if there's county involvement for long-term maintenance of the trees, because Alberta Transportation doesn't want to assume the maintenance of the trees over the long term. So they wouldn't accept a proposal from just a community association. It has to be from the municipality. So that's one of the reasons, as well as it's important to have the county support on this project. So I can answer any questions around that as well.
Questions from council?
So, but I see you're worried that by going this route, we might have to hire extra seasonal employees to get the first 2 years of watering.
There's a potential for that if the requirements of from Alberta Transportation around traffic accommodations, which we anticipate that's going to be, we'll need those resources to water those trees for the first 2 seasons, correct?
So the community association is willing to do it, but it might not be feasible.
Might not be feasible. Once we get the exact terms, we might be able to try to figure out a plan to make that happen, but we're providing the kind of the worst case scenario so the council has a fulsome report about what it could be, right? So there could be something, a hybrid model somewhere in between maybe, but this is to provide staff to do it in the worst case scenario.
Councillor Eichert?
So why isn't this under curb? Seems to be like this should have been funded.
They're not asking for funding.
Well, they're asking for $27,000.
Yeah, they're seeing that as a potential unintended consequence, but they also need approval, which would be outside of curb. Because we need to, if I'm understanding correctly, we need to assume responsibility for the planting, even though they're funding it through fundraising to get the AT authorization to plant in their right-of-ways.
That is correct. So there would be a curb request coming next year for the trees, I anticipate, or however they're going to fundraise. I don't know exactly I would anticipate one of that would be a curb, but the other side of it is we need county approval to move forward with the project, and there could be some funding for staff to water the trees in the future.
A lot of these spaces aren't their land either.
Deputy Reeve Clausen?
I remember a tree discussion a long time ago because my daughter was in here with Bring Your Kid to Work Day. And we talked about trees for a long time. I think it was in Gleason, and we were talking about the same thing. We decided if the community doesn't look at water them, why should we put the trees in? if I recall. I think that's what it was.
And I think the unique element to this application is that they're using it for that noise or the traffic quiet, like the trying to reduce speed through environmental design, essentially.
But these were boulevard trees, very similar. We were cutting ones down and replacing them.
Yeah, no, I do recall that conversation for sure. I do appreciate that staff is anticipating, the potential response from AT. I was very grateful for that heads up. I am also concerned about the cost. I did wonder if there might be capacity with existing hamlet operations with the tree watering bags. Like, I don't think you need to fill those. What is it, twice a week or something? You need to. I haven't done it personally, so I don't know, but.
All I'm thinking is 27,000.
I fully appreciate, yeah.
And it shouldn't take that long to fill those tree bags. You got to do them once a week or whatever the case may be. Seems to be just another, and I'm just worried that we're going to end up hiring a full-time staff to do something that shouldn't wired.
Is it possible to provide the letter of support, find out what the requirements will be, and then surely there are some options we'd be able to explore. I'm not sure here. I do appreciate the fact that the community is, they're willing, they would like to be able to do it themselves. It's just that the requirements
Currently,
might not allow them to.
look after everything they got there. I don't think they're asking for extra help.
They're
just
not asking for it.
permission.
Yeah,
But
they're
it's just
not,
that
but
we're-
administration is anticipating that Alberta
be
Transportation may
everything
require
goes north.
professional.
That's not the
maintenance.
plan. Like 2 years ago, there was a young guy there, got an environmental award for planting trees and looking after it, and he was only like 12 years old.
But they probably
whole
weren't on the
community
highway.
gets out.
The problem is it's along the highway, right? It's a safety issue, I think. Alberta Transportation is going to say, you can't just have any Joe person watering trees on the highway. You need.
It's a liability.
Yeah.
And they'll just drive down the fire road there.
We know that, but Alberta Transportation likely doesn't.
And at the end of the day, if we're putting our names on the letter of support, I think we do just have to be mindful. Question to administration, might there be capacity within existing hamlet operations if they're providing the tree watering bags where we could minimize the potential cost?
That was considered.
And you don't think you have
That's correct.
capacity?
That was
Okay.
correct. And we still could do the application and find out exactly what the requirements are. We could always withdraw if we decided not to do that. So we could move forward with the process, get the application and approval from AT. There's a 2-year window on that approval, and then we could bring it back to council if it looks like we're going to have more costs than. Or if we can get the volunteers, or we can come up with a
Deputy
plan.
Reeve Clausen, then Councillor Laverson.
Thanks. It says suitable trees, and I know like City of Calgary Boulevard trees, they've got an extensive study on what lifts sidewalks, what wrecks infrastructure, crushes sewer lines. I'd hate to put trees in there that's gonna, because I've seen it happen, can just wreck a bunch of stuff, because they will go find the easiest path to water. So hopefully we
And we have
follow those-
extensive
there's-
documentation as well.
That was part of the 2-year process, is going through getting the right trees for the right setbacks and everything else, all that. Because all those considerations were made.
You usually end up with something that people want, a canopy or something, and you just can't. It doesn't work, right? So.
Looking at the trees, the only one, as long as you don't put any of the water lines going to that new subdivision past the top, because you got poplar trees in there, along the road, going up the hill. I don't know where the water line's going to be going in to feed them, or to.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that. From all the current lines, we're fine with right now, but I'll definitely.
That new subdivision's supposed to be coming in, so you won't want to have to rip up your trees in a few weeks, or a few years, sorry.
Yes, through the Reeve, the new water line to loop Rosebud, the Rosebud water system, will not be impacted by the tree plan. It's been reviewed by both departments.
Perfect.
That's it.
And the only other thing, but the American elms and Dutch elm, you've contemplated that and you're good with that recommendation.
Yes.
You know far more than I
There's
do.
just proper maintenance, and they are a good tree.
Perfect.
They're a 100-year tree, right? So they're a good tree for that planting as well. So
It's perfect. We just have to ask the questions. We don't know the answers, we just have to ask the questions. So, Councillor Larison.
I'm going to move that council approve the Rosebud Community Tree Planting Concept Plan as presented, including support for the short and long-term maintenance of the project, and further direct administration to apply for the Alberta Transportation Roadside Development Permit.
There's a motion on the floor. Questions or discussion?
So then that motion says that we'll pay for the staff that's required if it's required. I'd rather it came back and we decided.
Yeah, I'd prefer that we separate that out.
And I guess,
Support the concept, but find out what we're actually on the hook for. It's too open-ended for me to like it.
so from a process perspective, in order to do the application, they need the letter of support. I'm concerned about withdrawing support if AT comes back and says, yes, you need Wheatland County to be doing the maintenance, which would include the additional seasonal employee. Like, it's just, to be super blunt, going to be hard to justify the $27,000 tax dollars. For, you know, like,
For the money they're going to fundraise.
no, I understand that, Councillor Kester. What administration is anticipating is the impact to like our budget for an employee to do the watering if that's what AT requires. And we can't circumvent that if that's what AT is requiring as a municipality from a liability perspective, I would assume.
Rosebud's got a lot more trees than that, and they water them now. They have an irrigation system.
No, completely.
We're
And
anticipating something that's probably never going to happen. I
what
find
would
that
administration estimate the probability
Imagine
of?
in the grant process, you have to maintain them. What's your capacity? So yeah, as the applier, because the only one who can apply is the municipality. But the hamlet is already doing all that.
I think though, as Councillor,
I guess you could anticipate, but I would anticipate the other way. We'd never lift the pail. I mean, they don't do it now anywhere.
But what we're saying, Glenn, is that, sorry, Councillor Kester, is that the community association is willing to do it, but we think that Alberta Transportation is going to tell them they can't do it because there's a safety issue with them being along the highway.
Well, if that happens, then it can come back to council.
That's what.
so then the letter of support would exclude
Then the letter
watering?
of support is no good
Or
because they're
exclude
not going to give
maintenance?
it.
Oh, is that true, Dave? What do you think about that?
if council agrees to the concept and us applying to AT to find out the requirements, we can move forward with that and then bring something back with. We'll know the actual plan then, and if there's options around having the volunteers be able to do it with some support or a contractor, or we could come up with some other options,
Or if we
right? So-
provided insurance or something for volunteer, I mean, I don't know if there's other options.
Yeah, once we know exactly what transportation is looking for, they may not because it's low. It's also low traffic volume as well, so that requirement may not happen. We don't know right now, right, until we find that out. It's been my experience, though, it's typically one of their liability statements that are on there that be traffic accommodation requirements. So.
Sorry. Please, I'm sorry, I was trying to find something.
No problem, if I may, just to supplement the community service coordinator's comments. If council would be open to just a friendly amendment to the motion, just for a level of comfort with respect to, I think the verbiage of the long-term maintenance might be something that's catching council. So with respect to, obviously, we did want to provide a fulsome report with the potential costs associated. But it reads right now, obviously, that council approved the Rosebud Community Tree Planting concept as presented, including support for the short and long-term maintenance of the project. So perhaps if council's open to it as an amendment or a suggestion, striking the short and long term of the project and direct administration, and then continue on to direct administration to apply for the Alberta Transportation Roadside Development Permit, and perhaps report back to council after that. So just a suggestion for perhaps an amendment for consideration.
So you want to take out the information between the commas is what you're saying, correct? Yes, I'd consider that a friendly amendment. I don't think it's necessary, but whatever. We're spending way too much time on this.
So then for clarity, the motion would be that council approve the Rosebud Community Tree Planting Concept Plan as presented and further direct administration to apply for the Alberta Transportation Roadside Development Permits. Okay, and then I guess just for clarity, by applying for that, that would not imply assumed responsibility for that maintenance. Just so that I just want to manage expectations clearly, both for the Rosebud community and the ratepayers that have worked so hard on this, but also obviously stewarding tax dollars. So we're not implying we're assuming responsibility for that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that. If there is a motion on the floor, any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.49. We could just move it too. I think it's pretty.
So Russ was going to present this one today, but he is sick. So I think typically, historically, and probably the ASB members would know this a little bit better, the council typically does approve the ASB, a family nominated each year for the Farm Family Award ceremony at the Calgary Stampede. And then typically what does happen is that the council of the area is the one that is usually kind of put forward approved attendance at the Calgary Stampede. So what we've done is we just put the division councillor in there for attendance plus a guest for July 11th. If there's any questions, please let me know.
Council's wishes.
I'll move that council approve the attendance of Agriculture Service Board member Shannon Laprise and one guest, me, to the 2022 BMO Farm Family Awards being held on July 11th, 2022 at the Calgary Stampede.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
Thank you. I'll be honored to represent.
We appreciate you. We will move to 2.410.
Good afternoon, Council. Brad Bullock from Administration presenting. So this item, it's a utility right-of-way in the Lakes of Murfield community. When the community was transferred to the county, this right-of-way was also transferred. In hindsight or in further review, it's been recognized that this right-of-way should have been transferred to the golf course because this is their infrastructure. And so we're proposing this right-of-way, the registration of the right-of-way be transferred from the county to the golf course. And that's my report. If there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Council's wishes.
I'll make the motion that council approve the transfer of the utility right-of-way registered as 071026550 RAV Golf Inc. based on the information in the RFP.
Questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We will move to 2.411.
Good afternoon again, Council. Joel from Corporate Services here to present the Utility Subsidy Review Report. Sorry, I will transfer down here. Starting on page 105. I will just go to the schedules here and put them on the screen. The information provided is intended to show an overall consolidated perspective that includes water and wastewater within the county. Revenue collected for the utility function does not completely cover costs, which leads to subsidization with non-utility revenue. This report shows the level of subsidization for each hamlet as well as an overall consolidated utility function. Some important considerations when reviewing the information in this report. Most areas have unique infrastructure and service setup. Details for this are provided in the content of the report, but some summary examples include Carsland and Speargrass having shared water and wastewater systems, just to the point where we included them within the same line of the financial report. The county only services wastewater in Clooney and does not do water distribution. Another one would be Rosebud, using a low pressure wastewater system. And amongst last but not least, Muirfield wastewater is currently hauled by truck. The other thing to consider is amortization in these numbers is included. If you're not familiar with that, amortization is just the accounting cost of an asset that we basically, when we spend it, we allocate it across the life of that asset across however many years we think it's going to live. So if we turn to the consolidated utility subsidies schedule, which is on page 109 of your report, some noteworthy items on that schedule include, we've included a bar graph for the revenue section, and it shows that most utility revenue in this area is obtained with direct billing, which would be consumption, flat rate billing, capital levies, debt recovery, those kind of items. And there's some smaller miscellaneous and recoveries, but most of it is through the utility billing itself, and it shows up on those bills. Debenture recovery is used when large infrastructure projects have been undertaken and funded using loans from the Alberta government. The payments on the loans are made by the county to the province, but in normal course, they're recovered directly from the utility accounts as they pay back that infrastructure cost. There's also, within the content of the report itself, a chart showing the utility rates. I believe it's on, I will go to it here, page 106. And that shows the applicable rate for each hamlet. You'll note that the consumption, flat rates, capital levies are the same across most hamlets, other than Clooney and Muirfield. Each hamlet varies in the dollar amount and percentage of subsidy. Go back down here. Page 109. The overall consolidated utility subsidy across the 3-year period that we've looked at ranges anywhere between 51 and 58%. We turn to the final schedule, consolidated utility subsidy by account. Essentially what we've done here is taken the subsidy that we calculated in the first schedule by hamlet, and then we've divided it by the number of utility accounts available to come to a subsidy per account. Some more important things to keep in mind with these subsidy values is the number of utility accounts in each area is relatively constant, except for Muirfield, which is a newer community experiencing fast development. The growth of a community such as Muirfield leads to an increase in the number of utility accounts, which corresponding revenue increases, but also potential operating and capital increases along with that. Also, the Rosebud subsidy, you'll note, increased substantially in 2021, and this is due mainly to the completion of the wastewater lagoon in that area, which was a substantial cost, And so the amortization started being accounted for in the 2021 year. That concludes my presentation.
Fantastic. Questions or discussion from council?
And maybe just some further supplemental comments. There is a lot of information here, and certain events can definitely make it seem like one area is getting a lot of subsidy compared to another. A good example in Clooney. So Clooney, the subsidy we calculated out in 2020. So this is financial information that we have. It's almost double in 2021. And there isn't much going on in Clooney. However, an event that could occur would be something as simple as there was a line break and that line break needed to be repaired, and say the line break didn't happen in the previous year. So if you take a $5,000 repair in Clooney, which would be operational, it gets included into those expenses. So it can be skewed very easily, especially if there's not a lot of utility accounts. And then what we try to do as well is we try to normalize the expenses that have been presented to council. When I talk about normalizing something, a great example is the water license that the county is in the process of procuring. And so all those expenses went to the Carsland Water department, or just, I guess, division. So what we did was we pulled those out. However, that's not to be said that something could have been coded somewhere where, it's a lot of data that can be skewed easily based on, some expenses being coded somewhere, some not, events occurring from year to year. It's kind of a moving number year over year, and yeah, it's just a lot of data. So it was an interesting project for sure to kind of see where we fall. There's lots of good information there for council to consider as well. Thank you.
Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Thanks. So what this obviously shows is we have everybody's paying the same except for one community that we inherited, and we basically went as close to cost recovery as we could there. So our rate right now, just on water alone from WRC to Gleason and Rosebud, our water rate that we pay, we can't negotiate, is $5.13 a cube. That's what we're buying it for, and we're selling it for $2.22. I've been in business for a while, but that doesn't. And so there's a philosophical thing with water and wastewater is it a utility or is it subsidized? When you're in a city, and this is all you're dealing with, say you're Strathmore, Calgary, whatever, that's all you're dealing with. It's a different thing. But we're dealing with farmers, acreages, hamlets, so when you're pulling the tax money out, those people that don't have any access to any of this are subsidizing this. So I have a problem with that. I would like to see either everybody pays a different rate, or we all pay the same. I'm getting pressure from people in Muirfield about the wastewater, and we have lowered it, and we have done things to make it better. But we still have, I think in the back of my mind, we have a big capital expense coming up with a solution to wastewater, however the grant funding or whatever that comes back to us. We're going to figure out that one too. So. What makes it hard as a representative of the area, when you are paying way more than everybody else. I can explain it, but still doesn't make it easier for them. So, one side I want cost recovery, one side I want fairness. So.
Councillor Kester.
I agree with that. I'd also like to see what we're actually paying in Speargrass and Muirfield for treatment water. We're just currently charging the same. Thinking there can't be a heck of a lot of difference in the price. And
so the cost to produce water per cube kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the actual cost? I don't know if you can get it as detailed as Wheatland Regional Corp details theirs. They got it right down to the second of manpower, right? I know the county, we don't have that extensive report, but still, we can do a good estimate, that's for sure. And Muirfield, I'm always troubled by their wastewater and their hauling. I know we are selling lots and we're putting that in a reserve, and that money is to go to build a system. I believe there's enough money there, easy to build a system as we sell more lots. The county was to subsidize that rate hauling with that reserve money, it would cure the county to get a solution faster than just the way we're doing it. I would be open if you something about the rate hauling and that money come right out of that reserve. County or staff could make a presentation what that would cost us per month and how long that would. Because that's basically their money they're putting aside for wastewater, and they're still paying. I think it's neutral for the county. Could see a little bit of a report what it would cost. I would be in favor of that. I don't know what the council of the area thinks.
So the money for lots definitely that we've saved is also for the development itself. So there's some paving that needs to be done. There's some sidewalk repairs that need to be done. There's lots of stuff. There's not just the wastewater solution, which has to be done as well. And then if you put your developer hat on, if we want to open up new lots, we got to take and reinvest that money somehow and figure out, and then hopefully that's coming back too. So it's a challenge. Of course, if we lower, the biggest thing I hear is people are upset with the wastewater rates because they want to water their grass and they get charged, and some people think there's a separate meter thing that you can't. I know you can't do that. But when you look at this chart, it just shows it's different than everybody else, and people can pick up on that, and they have, and they point it out to me, and I don't think just lowering one is appropriate. I think we should be, like, when I look at the rates across the board, I think we should be raising everybody's and maybe lowering one. Like when we're losing $3 a cube, roughly $2.75 a cube in water, and our wastewater charge is $1.56, which is dirt cheap. Pretty much anything but on a regional water line is $4.75 to $5. That's a given nowadays. So I'm pretty sure producing water would be about the same. So.
Councillor Laprise and then Councillor Bigger.
So yeah, I was surprised to see how much subsidization we have going on in this. But I think I heard you before reference gradually increasing, maybe not to cost recovery, but to something that's a little more fair. I do see that it's not fair for other ratepayers to be subsidizing people to have water in their homes when we have well water that isn't always ideal water. So and septic and all of the waste water as well. So anyways, I'm curious how we got to the $2.22 for water, or was that just a
Used to be 50 cents.
So I know from our term, when we started in 2017, we had integrated, and I was trying to quickly find last year's to this year's, but I know we had 15% for sure for 3 years consistently that we had laid out so that ratepayers could sort of anticipate the increases. And the goal is actually or at least my recollection of the goal was to get to cost recovery, but to do so gradually because of those kind of philosophical points that you were just making around these are not services that are accessible by all ratepayers. So if we could, in a stepped sort of approach, get to cost recovery, I fully support that. We had discussions at the time about just sort of, for lack of a better term, like just ripping the Band-Aid off and going to it. But that would have been a significant increase and would have been a true hardship. I can speak on behalf of many of my ratepayers. It would have been a hardship in some of our hamlets for sure, some of our serviced communities. I think this is really good information, and I am fully supportive of looking at sort of a plan to increase funding. The only point, and I'll go to Councillor Bigger right away, just with Muirfield, the only thing I am mindful of is just through that process of when we assumed responsibility, had the county not assumed that responsibility, there is a risk that their rates would be even significantly higher than what they had been with the previous developer, never mind sort of in comparison to what our administration has done to bring them down. And that I don't believe there was sort of council direction to subsidize those at the time that we took it over. the discussion was that we would maintain cost recovery on that with the goal, and I'm contemplating the idea around using that reserve. My concern with that is then you decrease the reserve and you could actually postpone your build of a permanent solution, which should substantially reduce those costs, looking at other communities where we have like wastewater treatment where we're not trucking. So we'd kind of have to balance that. But I think there was clear discussion of the council of the day, and of course the decision's only as good as the next decision, but that we would maintain cost recovery because we were assuming a significant liability by becoming the developer. And I know we see that reserve growing, but as you very eloquently pointed out, that, you know, there's significant liabilities we've assumed as well, and strategic investment that we need to balance that can actually grow the community and contribute to the sustainability and vision that I think some of the community members I've spoken to would like to see that built out. And we have a better chance of doing that with strategic investment. So it is a tough one. I totally see where you're coming from, but I do just keep it in context of, you know, where they were. I'm going to go to Councillor Bigger and then back to Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Yeah, the first thing is for their wastewater. It is prorated at a different rate for watering your lawns. Just so you know that it is different. And I would like to know what it costs to make water at Carsland Speargrass. Because I do believe if Carsland is the one that's making our expenses, I don't believe Speargrass has had many expenses. I think Speargrass maybe would actually be at cost recovery, just by the numbers that we had a few years ago. If we're still going by that, and cost probably did go up a little bit, so I'm not sure. But we'd be fairly close. So I would like to see that too.
For sure, we can do that. So I think we kind of have general direction to determine how much cost per cube at Speargrass and Muirfield, right?
So yeah.
Yeah. So I believe it is cost per cube at Speargrass and Muirfield. Is that what council's looking for water?
Yeah, and you get the cost to make water, right?
Yeah,
and then
cost to make water.
What about the expenses? Should we take the expenses separate from those two?
So the expenses have been provided, the total expenses, and then we just kind of divided it
They're
out.
combined, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, we can't keep it, I understand that it's the same area, but it is one's causing more expenses than the other at this moment. But I forgot my train of thought. Yeah,
Deputy,
go on. I forgot.
we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
When it comes, Deputy Reeve Clausen.
So in regards to how we ended up with Muirfield, I do honestly believe we wouldn't have had an option. I think we would have had a bigger expense had we not jumped in when we did. And I think we would have got, I heard from the developer, they were walking away and handing the keys. So we were going to end up with regardless at some point. And yeah, we've owned some of the problems there because, I mean, I've seen 5 different renditions of what needed to be done for building. We never, as a county, we should have allowed them to put House 1 in there before a solution was put in place. That's done. It's over with. We're here. So I don't have a problem with using the money that we've spent from the lots to subsidize this. But I'll say this, we could have sold those lots for a lot more money. And anything in the future we can sell for more money. Like we sold them quick because they were cheap, to be honest. Like they went fairly fast because once the market changed and they were affordable compared to other places. So we can easily pick up some revenue there. Also, the more customers you have, just like everything else we have in the system, the cheaper it gets. So it's kind of, the more users you have, the cheaper it gets. So there is a calculation for wastewater, but if we use that same calculation throughout the whole thing, the subsidy, not the subsidy, but the water versus wastewater calculation, Muirfields is way out, right? And there's a reason why, because we're hauling it. But we're part of that problem. We haven't come up with a solution yet, right? we could easily, hopefully have a solution with grants or whatever to come up with something that is affordable and utilized. But we got to own some of that.
Let's get it done.
I don't have a number in my head how to subsidize it. I've had people say, well, knock $5 off. Well, I don't want to throw a dart at a board. I want something that is what is appropriate.
Councillor Kester and then Councillor Laverson.
I agree with Councillor Clausen. I'm not in favor of a subsidy. I'm in favor of getting this problem solved. Like, we've had it for a couple of years and we haven't done anything, really. But comment about you wouldn't let one lot in without a solution. There was a solution. The pipeline was financed and built, and it was, when it come to council, that they were trucking it, and that pipeline did not go to where it was intended to go. I didn't know what to say. I was always under the impression that it was done. It was okayed by municipal affairs. That's what we did. So there was a solution. It wasn't the county's fault that it didn't happen. And we're stuck with it. I just wanted to clarify that for the new councillors,
I guess the challenge was we didn't have securities, right? There's a timeline that you would hold securities after. Councillor Laverson?
Okay, thanks. I agree that we should fix the problem, but just a question. So the rest of the ratepayers of the county are currently spending $1.451 million to subsidize these communities. Is that correct?
Yes, but that total would not be cash. You'd have to back out amortization. But that would be the total all in, including non-cash expenses.
Okay, so what would the cash expenses? Just ballpark it for me.
You know what? I actually don't have that number. I couldn't even accurately ballpark it. I'd have to take a look at the numbers.
How about an inaccurate ballpark? 50%?
Sure.
That'd be plenty low, right?
I honestly, I couldn't even ballpark it right now. I could get it for you in an hour or so.
Okay. So my question now for council is, we spend hours this morning debating on whether to spend $75,000 for Redland, but we're okay with $1.5 million for these few communities? Explain to me how that makes sense.
I'm not okay with this. I've been fighting this from day one. I want full cost recovery. It takes a long time to get there.
And I think it's important to note as well two of the conversations, one, you noted that we were taking too much time discussing. My concern isn't necessarily with the potential $27,000 for those specific trees in Rosebud, or the $75,000 or $100,000 or whatever it might be in Redland. To me, you have to extrapolate that out if you're setting a precedent across the county, across the 24 communities in the county, and then the potential cost that could have. So that's part of why I think it's important that we spend time deliberating and having fulsome discussion around every taxpayer dollar that we spend. These are providing an essential service, and I agree with Councillor Eichert. It's been an ongoing conversation and definitely been a priority for sure. I don't think we're minimizing in any way the gravity of these costs. It's sort of forging a path to reduce that so that we're not subsidizing. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
So I'm the same. I want, these numbers are low. They were lower when I started, and I've pushed this from day one. It's not fair to everybody else to subsidize this. It should be. It's a service that is only provided in a very few small areas of the county. It's their choice to live there. We assume some of these failed municipalities, I guess would be the best word, because they voted to come back to us. So we've kind of taken on that. Typical small municipalities have always had really low water and wastewater rates. You look now, Calgary's probably the lowest, but Strathmore's is going up. There's lots of them that are going up now because it's a cost that you can collect it from taxes. But like I said, we're in a unique situation where we have different tax people that are subsidizing this that don't have access to it. So, and speaking of taxes, Muirfield, assessed value per home is probably one of the highest areas in the county.
Yeah.
And we have we probably have 100 homes going up there in the next year or two. So return on investment there if we lower the rate, we're going to be getting quite a bit of taxes there, but we also have quite a bit of expenses. If we play it smart, we can probably, I hate to say this, we might be able to break even on residential development, but that's really hard because there's recreation demands, there's all kinds of stuff that, you know, we deal with as a town. Matt's shaking his head because it's true. Like, people have expectations when they come into a community, and we are, for the developer, and we are the municipality around there. Even if we're not the developer, we're still getting pressure for that. Fire halls, all that stuff. There's, you know, when people come, they want that stuff. So.
And concurrent with that line of reasoning, though, too, is our mill rate is lower than a lot of urban municipalities, where they might be seeing their utility rates offset, and they would have that sort of increased total but proportionate benefit of a lower mill rate due to the higher assessed values. So essentially, like, they could be saving on property taxes versus, say, that same property in an urban municipality where your mill rate could be higher. So there is that benefit to being in Wheatland County even. And with that does come less services for sure, and cost sharing agreements with urban neighbors that are providing services and things like that. So definitely a lot to consider here. In terms of finding a path, we have a couple of outstanding information requests around Carsland Speargrass cost per cube. Just trying to think if there was anything else we were looking for. In terms of setting utility rates, when would we be reviewing those? Oh, and I had one other question around Muirfield. Do we have a timeline for a potential wastewater treatment solution?
So through the chair, we are exploring grant funding options with AMWEP that could tie in the whole West Side servicing. And I believe the application deadline for that is November or October. So we're kind of just waiting for that one. Yeah, and that is it. And we did take a look into that amortization number, and it's just over $1 million for 2021. So the overall expenditure would be like 400,000 and some.
Do we have a time when we normally discuss
That's
utility
what I
rates?
was just asking administration.
I think it would be advantageous to discuss as a committee of the whole on June 14th.
Sure.
And just give us some time, and then we can kind of come up with a framework that council would be agreeable on, and bring that forward, and potentially start increasing rates or decreasing rates depending on what council's wants to do.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I know I felt better when we had sort of a plan for increases that were somewhat predictable, dependent on usage. And I fully support that. So is that acceptable if we can have some more information, come back to committee of the whole and further this? Deputy Reeve Clausen.
The problem is we had electrical rates and gas rates that just go up because they go up, because that's the cost recovery. We've all seen it. My bills have doubled. So why is water and sewer any different? Because we're politics? Because it's political? Because I'm afraid to get reelected? I could not get reelected because that rate's not going to change. That's the reality of it. Somebody else could be punted in here because I get a lot of pressure from this. Is it right? No, I want to run it like a utility. But all these numbers are all the same except for one. I understand why.
They're not all the same. So Carsland Speargrass isn't paying like the WID rate, for example. So Gleason has that.
Capital levy may be different, but yeah.
Yep, there are.
Wastewater is different.
Yeah, there's definitely nuanced differences.
Committee of the whole.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I'm also wondering, like, one of my concerns, and we haven't touched on it, and I do not want to deep dive into this, but there are, and it sounds like some work is coming forward from WRC, but question to administration, is it possible for council to direct our representatives on WRC to, like, bring to the board a request to do it, like, whatever possible to lower that rate? Because I know there's, and I don't want to deep dive into this, but I have outstanding concerns around WRC and the cost that is driving a lot of this subsidization and potential efficiencies. I know there's been, one change I can think of that would have reduced the rate potentially slightly. But I know there's been other discussions, like, can we direct our board members to bring that forward?
The council can definitely direct board members to bring an issue forward on behalf of the county as they are appointed by the county. However, it is an autonomous board with
and they need to do
voting members that
best
need
for
to.
the board.
To bring a point forward is a good discussion, and the council can definitely recommend that they bring it forward for discussion to add to the agenda. But
I can speak, our mandate is 5% profit, if that. So we just recently passed, and we do our water rates every year. We do it in the first part of the year because we have to basically have enough income to support what we do. It has changed substantially, and it is, I don't know where there'd be much more left to save unless it was, to be honest, amalgamated somewhere else. But that's not something that some municipalities would choose to do. There's efficiencies in size and things like that, but you got to look at future growth and things as well. So it's, as sitting on the board, I don't see much left to save. It's pretty well cut and dried. There's always...
These regional water systems cost money. So Nihil's got to be somewhere in this, in the $5 range. Yeah, so, we're not talking it just costs a lot of money to run these systems, so.
A regional water line, too, it's not like a municipality. We can't. The utilities are what they are. Everything is what it is. There's no way to subsidize it through taxation or hide the cost, if you so be it, which is what a lot of municipalities do. They just put it in general taxation to pick up the lack of funding. And it's a business. You can't do that. It's what it is, what it is. And I suspect with the utility rates that have been going up, it's going to happen more. The rates are going to go up again because electricity is not cheap. We don't get a cheap rate. We don't get a cheap rate in gas. We make every effort to lock in a price for as long as we can, but eventually you've got to pay the piper. So.
Doesn't Nihil still have municipal contributions?
I don't know.
I might have it right here. I'm just looking.
But they also have a much larger.
They have multiple systems.
They have supply much. You need a volume of water. The more water you sell, Calgary, for instance, buying water from Calgary is probably the cheapest out there because they have a million plus users on it, right? So they can provide water substantially cheaper.
Anyways, if administration brings some more information back and we can continue the conversation, see where we can go from there. We could just do a motion to accept for information for today.
A lot of municipalities look at going to, I think Chestermere tried it, and a lot of them do try to have a private utility company because it takes this decision away from you. And it makes a private company, and they can, so if a private company picked this up and did it, they have to answer to the AUC, they have to prove their thing in court, and they're only allowed 5 or 10% profit, that's it. Whereas a municipality, you're allowed to charge whatever you want, but they know that you won't be elected again if you make it too bad. So that's the reality of it. That's how. So.
Could administration perhaps just bring, just so that it saves this conversation and searching, but maybe some updated comparables? I know you guys have like a group of similar size location municipalities to us, just in terms of how they approach this, if they have any policy around it, just if there's anything, just so we're not reinventing the wheel.
For sure we can, and we'll bring that forward at committee of the whole.
That'd be wonderful. It'll just save us conjecture, and it gives us just some comparisons.
Even the water rates and standards in Rocky Ford.
Yep, we'll bring them all forward, just so council has that for information. And I think we can make a recommendation and bring it back to council too, at the committee of the whole.
Yeah, and I'd be more curious about rural municipalities, just because there is the distinction that not all of our taxpayers can access the utilities, whereas in a village, I would think for the most part, your ratepayers and utility users would be essentially the same group, maybe to different scales potentially or something, but. Excellent. Any other questions or discussion? Motion to accept the review. This is a lot of excellent information. Thank you to our team who worked on it and brought it forward. We appreciate it. And a motion to accept as information.
Also move.
Councillor Laprise has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move to correspondence. We received a request regarding a proclamation for Seniors Week. Some information from Rosebud Cemetery Committee with a request about the columbarium. Town of Mundare regarding policing. And an update on the FCM resolution. A letter regarding the previous FCM resolution we had put forward or related to that. See a couple of potential action items. Is there I would move the declaration in honor of the past, present, and future contributions of the seniors of this community and throughout Alberta, that we declare June 6th to 12th, 2022 to be Seniors Week in Wheatland County. Questions or discussion? We have done this in the past. I know WFCSS has at times collaborated with other regional agencies to celebrate. I'm kind of looking to our WFCSS board members to confirm. I'm just going off my memory. I think we've coordinated with the town possibly on some events for that week. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. There is also a request from Rose, but I don't know if we would like a motion for an RFD for that, or if administration has any comments regarding that request.
I think we just kind of put that in there, just so council's aware that it may be moving forward. There is some funds to be allocated in a future budget year. So kind of, if council, I think this project is kind of getting shifted back year over year just because of the start date. So they are starting it. So this is just more for council's awareness that once it's started, that the county most likely will be required to contribute some funding towards it. Again, just something that has been in the budget, just get pushed back for the start date.
There's no action needed by council?
No, just for future budgetary funds most likely to be passed. The amount is fairly small and needs to get done. So this is more of as an FYI.
I know they're pretty anxious.
Yeah, they were asking council to agree to begin the project immediately by assigning the appropriate personnel and resources to get the concrete pad surveyed and poured by the end of summer. And it does say that I just read. They were informed that the expenditure for the columbarium is approved for next year's budget, but they're asking for it to be done this summer.
Yeah, so kind of the general theme is that they're contributing some funds to it, and it is anticipated that the county will spend money in a future year. So I'm thinking that they most likely won't proceed unless the next year's budget, which isn't necessarily set in stone, is more or less set in stone, if that kind of makes sense.
Council's wishes, do we want to just accept for information the correspondence?
I think the Rosebud are asking for personnel to get the pad, make sure it's in the right place and whatnot. That paragraph there.
Madam Brief, I'm just wondering if our community services
Of course, absolutely.
elaborate a bit on
Please,
that.
thank you.
Thank you. To the Reeve, I've I've met with this group going forward, and I just wanted to. I asked the committee to send a letter to council, knowing it's in the budget for 2023. They wanted to expend the funds this year, so it's not any funds spent from the county. It's their contribution towards the project. They wanted to get the pad done this year, which in timing wise, it does make sense to have the pad done. So there's no real outlay for other than just staff time marking out, which is not a huge commitment as well. Working with them on that design, and there's an area set aside for the columbarium. It has been a project that's been on the books for a few years. We've bumped it back because there hasn't really been the community involvement part of it until recently. So I think it's more just aware the council's aware that they would really like it to keep in the budget for 2023, and just to make sure that council's okay with moving forward with that project. Worst case scenario, if the project gets delayed, the columbarium maybe doesn't get bought for another year, but the pad will be there, kind of thing. So, but they're really hoping to move forward.
So do you need a motion?
I don't think we need a motion. There's not really any expenditures. It's just working with the community on doing that. So I just more of just for council's information about the project, and that it looks like it'll be moving forward.
Wonderful.
That component of it.
Okay. And just very briefly, I have heard just because there are multiple issues with medical cannabis production across Canada, I did hear an update from a gentleman from BC, and we couldn't find anything around this documented, but he said through practice, advocacy has been working, and that they are no longer authorizing the same number of plants that they were historically authorizing. In addition to that, previously, and forgive me, I do not have my notes with me, but if I recall correctly, you were permitted to grow on behalf of 4 other licenses in addition to your own, or it might have been 3 and your own. That's now being constrained to 2. Which will limit like the total number of plants. And I will circulate, I do have some notes with me on my phone. I'll circulate, the federal government has acknowledged some of the concerns around organized crime, the safety issues, the utility issues. There's also been concurrent advocacy from some chiefs of police resolutions that have gone forward. I know this came to the FCM table again. And I've also been in touch with a councillor from the village of Dutchess who will be bringing this forward to Alberta municipalities so that the urban organization can bring this forward as well. So I guess just more of an update that the advocacy does appear to be being listened to. It doesn't sound like legislatively or through the regulation it's being like changed in that way yet, but through practice it's being changed. One concern I did identify is if they're renewing and there's no changes, I think they would still be able to have the same limits that they had previously, which can be a significant, I think if they were authorized for, say, just under 1,000 plants, you could have up to 5,000 plants in one site. And if that's being done on a renewal with no changes, my understanding is that that would be renewed. But for new licenses, at least there's some improvements and I believe some strengthened language around notification for municipalities and especially in terms of permitting and that type of thing. So some slow progress, and FCM does continue to advocate for that. So council's wishes.
Move to accept as information.
Perfect. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We have a few items under closed session. I'll move us into closed session. Sure. There will be a couple minutes as we transition the call line anyways. I'll move us into closed session. All in favor? Motion is carried.